Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the United States. Hope everyone is having a wonderful 20th of March 2025. Of course, it is March Madness. The tournament begins today. Hope everyone has nothing but success with their tournament brackets. Of course, probably after today, there'll be some bracket busters today or tomorrow or whenever. Just don't go throwing paper confetti after your bracket bust because that's not necessarily the way to go because you have to clean up your own mess. I looked at the college schedule earlier today. Maybe the first round this might be me, but the first round doesn't seem anything that eye-opens me a little bit, just simply because I think everything was more expected. Of course, Clemson lost earlier today to McNeese State, just largely because they fell behind early and they try to come back, but it was too little too late. And those kind of games actually crack me up, whatever level it is, whether it be college or pro. You go one half where you simply just don't show up, and then out of nowhere, you're down behind, and then you're like, okay, it's time to play now. And you wait till too late to try and come back. And by that point, the game is basically over. One of the premier coaches, the late Pat Summitt out of the University of Tennessee, who was just a phenomenal coach for the Lady Vols over there, said it best at one point. Can't win a game of the first one, but you certainly lose one. And that's basically what happened to Clemson today when they lost to McNeese State. They talk about how they had a great run, got to I think it was like the 5 seed, but that was pretty much it. Of course, also, it was Creighton over Louisville today. I wouldn't necessarily call that an upset because it's the 8-9 bracket. But I think the bigger issue, and everybody who's a Louisville fan probably agrees with me on this, how they were basically snubbed by getting an 8 seed when they should have been higher. Just largely because the athletic dean over there is a representative of the University of North Carolina, which we know North Carolina shouldn't have been in the tournament. So we know the story with all of that. But hopefully we have some people who have some winning brackets when all of this is said and done. I don't play simply because, the last 3 times I played, I had bracket busters after the second round. So basically, I just threw in the towel on that one. But hopefully everyone has themselves a wonderful day, a wonderful time with this tournament. Always exciting. Just a matchup in the first round didn't seem to be much to me. Maybe for me, it's largely because the last few years, we saw the unforeseen number 16 upset the number 1, which I saw twice in the last 5 years out of my own 2 eyes. But maybe after that, it's just hard to get into. Everybody's going to talk about shockers. But everything for me, outside of Clemson and McNeese State, has been expected so far. That's basically what it is. Now, there's going to be more games later tonight and tomorrow. We'll see where they go. Maybe we get one of those kind of upset Cinderella stories where it captures a nation by heart. Because I've always said when it comes to March Madness, there's always one story that comes out of nowhere, and everybody is hooked and everybody is connected. We just haven't seen it yet. Now, I'm going to get into the crux of my show today. For those of you that know that the show is now also on Apple, iHeart, and Spotify. If you're on those apps or you want to watch and listen again, you're more than welcome to. It basically found a way to work those out. Even the little loopholes I had to find a way to cross, the show is now on those platforms as well as the social media ones who are watching me live right now. So you're more than welcome to check me out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeart. So I'm going to go ahead and get right down to it here real quick. Since, I'm now on the iHeart platform, which part of it, I believe, is based out of Cincinnati. I guess I have to put my Homer hat on for a minute, which I'm going to go ahead and do. Sort of exciting news today out of the Cincinnati area. For the Reds, it has been announced that the statue of the great Marty Brennaman, who was the voice of the Reds for 4.5 decades, is going to have a statue outside of Great American Ballpark this year, some point in the fall. Excellent news. But as I've said this before, when it comes to Cincinnati, they're always 10 steps behind the 8 ball. This should have been done around the time when it came to the near end of Brennaman's career. This should have been done long before, but he is still going to get it either way. Congratulations to him. I'm a part of many big-time games for the Cincinnati Reds as a voice on 700 WLW among many stations. When he won the game, the famous quote, "And this one belongs to the Reds," called the back-to-back World Series in 75, 76 as a part of the Big Red Machine. Called on the radio station the legendary Pete Rose 4,192nd hit that broke the all-time hits record at Riverfront Stadium, which had that place packing. Called the 1990 World Series shocker when the Reds upset the Oakland Athletics in the sweep. And called maybe the most electrifying moment in Great American Ballpark history. This was back in 2010 when Jay Bruce hit the walk-off home run to clinch the 2010 National League Central Championship. It's probably the most electric moment in the history of the Great American Ballpark for the hometown Cincinnati Reds. So for Marty Brennaman, well-deserved, well-earned. We always salute and commend the service of what Marty Brennaman did behind the mic for the better half of 4.5 decades. Richly deserved. Congratulations. Job well done. I'll be down there at Great American Ballpark to see this. I thought this should have been done maybe toward the end of his career before he retired. I understand things get in the way, but this has been long overdue. Congratulations, Marty Brennaman. Salute to you, and kudos to the Cincinnati Reds for doing this, because he certainly deserves it. We talk about faces of the Reds franchise. He's certainly among the top, even though the guy basically just calls games behind a radio. But his voice will always be remembered in this Cincinnati sports area, especially when it comes to the sport of baseball. Now, speaking of Cincinnati, last night, the wildest thing I ever saw, and I thought Bengals fans were petty, and I thought the super fans and the Bengals media people were petty. Whoever runs the Bengals X account is a definition of a bona fide coward. To feel the need to video crop, photo crop, do whatever the heck it is you want to do to have this narcissistic obsession of revenge because all these people tried to say you couldn't sign Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. If you guys are on the X platform, I'm sure you guys seen it. It's one of the most arrogant and cowardly flexes I have ever seen, and it doesn't get you anywhere. It's one of the most stupid, moronic, idiotic things I've seen anyone associated with Cincinnati and Cincinnati sports ever do. I mean, I get it. A lot of the Cincinnati fans and the people all over the place here have their own criteria. But for this one, it seemed like this is more about revenge, throwing it in people's face, saying, I told you so, narcissism, cowardice. That's what this was. And when I saw this, I just asked myself, what in the world are you thinking? You got the contract signed with your two wide receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. You got them signed. It was great news. It was a time for celebration, not the time to go on some social media platform and throw it in people's faces. And now we have morons like James Rapien calling people trash when he is a moron himself. That is also intolerable and inexcusable. I said when I got this mic and I got back into this, you will not see me resort to that. Because I was fine with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins being signed. I was fine with everything that happened. I'm just not fine with carrying myself like an idiotic moron like a lot of these other people do in Cincinnati. I'm also never going to resort to throwing it in people's faces, say, I told you so. That's the problem with the Cincinnati sports fans, the super fans of the Bengals, and the media people like WEBN, 700 WLW, and of course, other stations like Channel 5, Channel 9, 12, and 19. As they want to throw things in your face almost like a narcissistic, arrogant way to where they would like to be the reason that things happen. It's something I would not have done, but I don't know why they will resort to this. But now you put yourselves out there. I hope you guys generate results, because now it's Super Bowls or bust when you sign the contracts, and now you resort to this. And not to mention, you still have an offensive line you need to fix. You have a defense who was ranked in the bottom of the league last year. And you think Al Gordon's going to help your defense? I mean, you haven't done anything of significance other than bring back B.J. Hill and sign T.J. Slayton. I mean, good luck. I mean, you better hope that you draft perfectly now. And I mean perfectly, because you have holes all over the place. And when you wrap the contracts to the two receivers, you just basically strangleholded yourself a little bit. We'll see where this one goes, because I said, once you make the investment you made to the two-star receivers, and think about this for a second. From now to the end of the 2020s decade, you're going to be paying Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins up to nearly $600 million. You don't get Super Bowls, it's a financial failure. You guys have probably crashed faster than Enron did way back when. And if you're in the business field, you know what happened with Enron. That's what you're staring at. And for you to conduct yourselves the way you did on the social media platform last night, especially on X, with the arrogance and the cowardice you displayed with that particular post, you better hope you do something significant, because everyone's bookmarked that and you're going to get it back in return. Don't resort to the mute or block button either, because it's time for you to simply take it, because you're the one that gave it. If you want to be the one that gives it and not takes it, you are a bona fide coward. I said that all along, and I still stand by what I stand, and I said what I said. If you got a problem with it in Cincinnati, you're more than welcome to talk to me. I'm not hard to find. And speaking of more news with the Bengals and their fans, because they clamor for attention every single way like a bunch of narcissists, last night, they seemed to go after Lamar Jackson again. And they seem to want to bring up his playoff record again. I guess this is response to a tweet where LeBron had one of those gifs or whatever the heck they call it, where he posted a picture of the gif of LeBron James doing this. And in typical Bengals and Bengals fan fashion, they thought it was about them. Why don't you just leave Lamar Jackson alone and worry about what the hell you're doing? Because you haven't made the playoffs in the last 2 years. You're fixing on going 3 straight if you don't fix all the rest of the issues. And that Lamar Jackson fella, all he's done since he come back from injury is beat you guys 4 straight times. And basically, you guys can't even tackle the guy. And that still requires an explanation. I don't get why you guys feel the need to want to extract revenge, extract personal vendettas on social media apps or in person because someone has an opinion and you seem to get offended by it. Shoot, you guys are even offended by the fact that some other team signed Tavon Jenkins today. And now you guys are obsessed over offensive guards. Do you guys even know what the hell you're doing and what the hell you're saying? We try to tell you about all of this about yourselves for the longest time. Yours truly being one of them, but you don't want to listen. You want to resort to the mute and block buttons. That's fine. I said this about Cincinnati Bengals fans for the longest time. Those regular fans, the super fans like Zim, the captain, and all those idiots. All those media people like James Rapian, Chris Rowling, Sarah Elise, Kelsey Conway, and all these content creators or whatever the heck they call themselves. I've said one thing about them all. They think driving the wrong way on a one-way street is going to be the answer to their problems, and they're not going to get any pushback. Doesn't work that way. You drive the wrong way on a one-way street, the car's going to be coming at you full throttle your way. What do you think is going to happen? There's going to be a collision. They think driving the wrong way on a one-way street isn't going to get them in any kind of trouble or any kind of pushback. Good luck. Go ahead and have at it. But as far as you guys go, maybe you guys in Cincinnati need to shut your phones off for about a week because you got what you wanted. You got the contracts of Chase and Higgins done. Maybe you should be celebrating that instead of doing the things you've done over the last couple of days, which is the Bengals official social media posts of arrogance and cowardice. And now you guys feel the need to go after Lamar Jackson. I don't get what is going on here. You did the same thing for the longest time to Chiefs and Chiefs fans after losing the 2022 AFC title game. You guys still do. Maybe you guys need to learn how to grow up for once. And don't get me started on what happened in 2015. How you guys carry yourselves like a bunch of scumbags after you lost to Pittsburgh in that AFC divisional round back in 2015. You know, the game where Montez Burfict walloped Antonio Brown upside the head, and basically riots ensued and fights ensued in the stadium and in the stands. Bengals fans felt the need to throw bottles at Ben Roethlisberger for no real reason other than the fact that they're cowards. They felt the need to start fights with Steelers fans in the stands and in the streets. I let everybody read that for themselves. This other content is pretty disgusting. I will not detail it, but I'll let you guys handle it, and you're more welcome to come to me to answer questions. By the way, I was not at that game for those reasons. But do better, be better. You guys want to Chase and Higgins' side? You got it. Be happy, be satisfied, and bring home some Super Bowls, because now it's officially Super Bowl or bust after you signed those 2 receivers and the investment you guys made. Ugh. I'm a personal financial investor myself. I have multiple investment accounts, and I learned how to just put the money there and let it build. But as I said, if I see something that's I'm not going to like, I'm going to make changes. But the money I put in, it's investing. That should be the attitude of Bengals and Bengals fans right now. Now to a historical moment that took place 30 years ago. After his 18-month hiatus, it was a return of the GOAT, Michael Jordan. Everybody knows the story, 18 months out of the sport of basketball, tried out for baseball. I think he hit like 200, and based on like some, I forgot how many RBIs or home runs he had. He had a couple of games with the Chicago White Sox. Actually had a game, again, back in the mid-90s against the Cubs, where he actually hit 2 for 4, and actually was looking like he was trying to be a pretty decent baseball player at one point. But he came back 30 years ago today when he basically just sent a fax with the 2 words, "I'm back." Basically, there was all kinds of theories as to why he walked out. The supposed gambling rumors and, the death of his father, lost motivation. Have at it. But he came back 30 years ago today at Market Square Arena in Indiana. And Reggie Miller, probably the greatest player in the history of the Indiana Pacers, summed up that day perfectly. I mean, the arena sold out before warmups. I mean, I think he packed like 16,000 Market Square Arena, and it sold out before the warmups for the anticipation of Michael Jordan. All kinds of questions and answers about what he can do, what he has left. Can he come back? Because, when you're out for 18 months, maybe you don't become the player you once was. I get it. But just the day of this anticipation, and basically it was a big hit on the NBA on NBC, and selling out Market Square Arena that day was absolutely nothing short of surreal. And basically from that point on, we know the story with this one. He came back, basically looked rusty the first couple games. About the 4th game back, he goes to Madison Square Garden and drops 55 on the Knicks. Of course, they lose in the 95 playoffs to the Magic. They came back in 96 and basically started the second of their three-peat. Basically coming back in 96. Basically, you can say the capital of this one was getting revenge on Orlando with the sweep, and then just beating Seattle to win the 6-game series to win the first of their second three-peat of the NBA championships. And basically, Michael Jordan ascended to arguably the greatest ever. Again, subject to opinion. It's basically the unanimous consensus. I get when people talk about the greatest ever in basketball, it sends sparks all over the place. I won't divulge into it. But I remind people of everything what Michael Jordan said about this conversation. He basically doesn't want to. He said, if you want to anoint him as it, go ahead. Because he was talking about how he never played guys like Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West during his time, so he can't have that distinction. I'm just paraphrasing. I don't know what the exact words were. But when he came back, after finally shook off the rust, Michael Jordan still was Michael Jordan. Maybe didn't ascend to the higher levels that he did during his first three-peat, where he basically broke all kinds of scoring records and had all kinds of athletic prowess, where he was just absolutely imposing. But he still was on the court, was still the best player in the world at the time, got a couple MVPs, the 3 championships, the 3 finals MVPs, and basically just ascended himself to another level when he came back in 1995, 30 years ago today. Of course, there's going to be all kinds of theories about it, but the way he did it, just a simple fax with 2 words, "I'm back," because it turns out his agent, David Falk, tried to draft a way to tell the world he came back, and Michael Jordan didn't like it, so he took matters in his own hands, basically by fax, picking up a piece of paper and just saying, "I'm back," and sent it out. And it was at Market Square Arena 30 years ago, which basically was almost standing room only because of the impact that Michael Jordan had. It was basically a big hit all across the NBA, all across the sports, and maybe you could say pop culture world, because that's the kind of impact Michael Jordan had. But it was 30 years ago today that it happened. Granted, they did not win the game, but Michael Jordan was fully back and basically used the rest of the 1995 season to get himself back together. Yes, he had some moments like he did against New York, where they had the 55-point game. But basically, it set the stage for what took place for the next 3 seasons when the Bulls had their second three-peat and completed arguably the greatest dynasty in NBA history with the 6 titles in 8 years. You can say a lot of things about Michael Jordan, but you can't deny the impact that he had, with the shoes, the clothing line, all the commercials he had with the Like Mike, of course, a spokesperson for Gatorade for the longest time. Of course, the Air Jordan, where it has the logo of doing the one-arm dunk that he did in the 88 slam dunk contest. His place and his impact is undeniable, and you can't put it into words. You almost have to live it to see what impact Michael Jordan had 30 years ago today, the day he came back. Michael Jordan is just a surreal specimen. I could tell you that. Some people call him the greatest athlete ever. I don't go that far because there's so much criteria to partake. But we talk about just natural athleticism. I understand it. Kids today who are so fixated on athleticism and skills don't understand what he did throughout the 80s and 90s when he was the man at the top of the heap in all of sports, not just the NBA or basketball, all of sports. That's how terrifically great and surreally great Michael Jordan was. Now we're going to touch on some boxing. Jake Paul wants attention again. And he was on his podcast seeking it. Turns out, I guess he accuses Turk Al-Sheikh of giving Canelo Alvarez $100 million to fight William Skull when he wanted to fight with Canelo Alvarez. You just lost, you just recently beat a 58-year-old Mike Tyson, and the one real fight you had, you lost to Tommy Fury, the brother of the 2-time heavyweight champ Tyson Fury, and you think you're worth of a shot against Canelo Alvarez? Give me a break. I mean, he goes on and talks about how he thinks Canelo Alvarez is afraid of him. Of course, there's some accusations of ducking in other areas with Canelo Alvarez. I'll leave that to another day. But Jake Paul has no leg to stand on. I mean, he's basically fighting YouTubers and 58-year-olds from the retirement home. And of course, it turned out he fought Mike Tyson, who was not too long before fighting for his life, according to his tweet on the X platform. And basically, Jake Paul went ahead and got through with his fight and wanted to be on Tyson's official record, which Mike agreed to. And now he thinks he's worth a shot against Canelo Alvarez. Apparently, there were negotiations at one point, which I don't know how true it is, because I never considered Jake Paul the most honest human being God ever seen. But for him to make the accusation, he basically doesn't have a leg to stand on, because of one time he stepped up. He wanted to fight Tommy Fury, who was a brother of Tyson Fury, and couldn't get the job done. And people know just how mediocre of a fighter Tommy Fury is. And now he's talking about wanting to fight Anthony Joshua. The last time Anthony Joshua fought somebody who was not in the boxing field, it was Francis Ngannou, and we saw what happened there. The same thing would happen if Jake Paul decides to fight Anthony Joshua. I know Anthony Joshua is on the downturn of his career, especially after he got knocked out by Daniel Dubois. But if Jake Paul is that intentionally ignorant and stupid to think he's worth a shot against Anthony Joshua and thinks he's stupid enough to beat him, let him go through with it. But here's the thing. No stipulations, because we know Jake Paul puts stipulations in his contracts. I mean, he tried it with Hasim Rahman Jr., the son of the former heavyweight champ Hasim Rahman. Try to get him to weight cut, and the New York State Athletic Commission paused it because he couldn't weight cut himself anymore. Kudos to the commission for that one, because weight cutting is just unhealthy, especially when it comes to combat sports. But if he wants to fight Anthony Joshua, being Jake Paul, if Jake Paul wants Anthony Joshua, as he says he does, I remember he said it on his podcast, he wanted Anthony Joshua. If he wants Anthony Joshua, go to England and have the fight. No stipulations. Let's see what you're made of. Even this version of Anthony Joshua, who is probably on his downturn after the loss to Daniel Dubois. But let's see what kind of a man Jake Paul is, because he hasn't been a man since he got into this thing. I mean, he's coming off a win over a 58-year-old Mike Tyson, which I'm surprised that actually went through and passed through the commissions. And of course, No surprise that Jake Paul probably put some stipulations in the contract for Mike Tyson because the first punch Tyson landed, it hurt Jake Paul. And of course, Tyson didn't do anything after that. More than likely because that was a stipulation that Jake Paul put in the contract that Tyson agreed to. But if Jake Paul wants Anthony Joshua, no stipulations, straight up, let's see what kind of a man he is. Go to London, go to Wembley Stadium, pack the house, and fight Anthony Joshua like a man without stipulations, and let's see what kind of a man you are. Because we know Jake Paul is a coward. We know Jake Paul is a degrading waste of human flesh. I would love to see Anthony Joshua just paste him on the canvas to where he needs to be carried out in a stretcher and in a body bag. Because that's where Jake Paul belongs right now. After what he pulled off with the antics with Mike Tyson, and ever since he's come into the game. And as far as the accusation of you ducking Canelo Alvarez has bigger fish to fry. I mean, shoot, I would pick his opponent, William Skull, to beat Jake Paul. That's how bad Jake Paul and his degrading cowards called Jake Paul fans are. And I would just love to see this just end once and for all. Tell Jake Paul to go to England, fight Anthony Joshua, no stipulations. Let's see what kind of a man he is. We'll find out if he has balls or a vagina, because that's what Jake Paul is all about right now. I just love to see this coward out of the sport for good, some way, somehow. If it takes putting him in a body bag, let's do it. Now to the most controversial night, probably in heavyweight championship boxing history. Perhaps you could say overall, subject to opinion, but still at least in the heavyweight division. This took place 26 years ago at Madison Square Garden. The first encounter between Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis. This had crazy build-up. You can trace it back to 1992 when there was a four-man tournament between Lennox Lewis, Razor Ruddock, Evander Holyfield, and Riddick Bowe. Lewis and Ruddock for a title eliminator, which Lewis wiped out Lewis wiped out Razor Ruddock in 2 rounds. Holyfield and Bowe for the heavyweight championship. Bowe beats Holyfield to win it. Riddick Bowe supposed to fulfill the obligation to mandate against Lennox Lewis. We know the story there. Bowe throws a belt in the garbage can to duck Lennox Lewis because he wanted no parts of Lennox Lewis. But from that on, you had an itch, even with the loss by Holyfield to Bowe, and eventually Lennox Lewis losing to Oliver McCall. You had a feeling still Holyfield and Lewis were going to collide at some point. Now, fast forward to 1995, when Evander Holyfield came back against Ray Mercer, lost to Riddick Bowe. Lennox Lewis came back after the loss to McCall, stopped a journeyman Lionel Butler, beat Ray Mercer and Tommy Morrison himself. But the real treads started to take place in November of 1996 when Evander Holyfield beat Mike Tyson for the first time, beat him like a drum. And 3 months later, Lennox Lewis regained a portion of the heavyweight title by beating Oliver McCall. 4 fights after that, Evander Holyfield got his revenge on Michael Moore to win the championship. And the 2 champions were Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis. Promoters, negotiations, and networks were sort of the way to prevent the fight from happening for the longest time. Of course, there's the presumption of Evander Holyfield winning an additional $5 million, which, perceives that he will only take the fight if he's ready because maybe he felt like he couldn't compete with Lennox Lewis. But the build-up took place, packed the house at Madison Square Garden, a fight I was fortunate enough to attend. And basically, Madison Square Garden was standing room only. The build-up was through the roof. I mean, the last big heavyweight championship fight of the 20th century, at least supposed to be, at a time when the heavyweight division got hot, it started to cleanse itself out. The last 2 fighters that stood in 1999 in the heavyweight division were Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis. The build-up for this was Evander Holyfield had a blunt guarantee to Lennox Lewis's face. He was going to knock him out in the 3rd round due to his religious background. I won't use a platform to discuss it. But he said it to Lennox Lewis's face, and Lennox Lewis just looked at him like he was crazy, and Lennox Lewis was right. Because only one person makes that kind of guarantee. That was the great Muhammad Ali. But going into this fight, it was basically even money fight. Holyfield was rolling after he finally got to Tyson. Lewis started to get himself together after he lost to Oliver McCall 4.5 years earlier. And we have this fight where it basically was a boxing lesson given by the great Lennox Lewis. Evander Holyfield was basically a target for Lennox Lewis's jab, right hand, right uppercut. dominated the first 2 rounds. Third round, Holyfield on his so-called prophecy started to come on as if he was going to try and get that third round knockout. And basically had his moments. But as the third round ended, you had a feeling that Lennox Lewis was going to come back, take over, pick it up where he left off, which he did from the fourth round on to the end. And essentially, at least in the eyes of the boxing world, at least those who watched it or witnessed it at Madison Square Garden, Lennox Lewis was going to be declared the winner. Now, who was the promoter of this fight? Don King. We know what Don King boxing was all about, and that's what Don King boxing was when the decision was announced. One judge inexcusably and inexplicably gave it to Evander Holyfield. One judge inexcusably and inexplicably gave it to Lennox Lewis in a margin that was closer than it should have been. That's where it was inexcusable. And one judge inexcusably called the fight a draw. And after the fight, the booze rain, chaos ensued. Lennox Lewis is asking Emanuel Stewart, what happened? What happened was Don King boxing took over again. And if you know Don King boxing is about the theatrics. Great cards, but also theatrics. And what's a Don King card or a Don King heavyweight title fight without the theatrics? Because that's what this was. I mean, if you didn't have anything, actually, let me back up. If you had this fight closer than 10 rounds to 2 for Lennox Lewis, you better come to me with an honest explanation because I'm not entertaining it. It was the only 2 rounds I gave Evander Holyfield on this night were 3 and 10. I mean, 3 was pretty obvious. 10, Lewis came out at the end, but I gave it to Holyfield by default because he could started and control the round from the beginning. But it goes to show you, once again, why you should never leave fights to the judges. But Lennox Lewis, who was a boxing pure pugilist in the heavyweight division as the 90s came to an end, wanted to show his style, wanted to show his, skills and his sweet science of boxing, showed it this night, but the boxing intelligentsia made sure he wasn't going to leave with the belts. And not just the boxing intelligentsia, but a part of that was, of course, Don King. And he didn't. Several kinds of questions, several kinds of investigations, several kinds of, hearings as to what transpired and what took place. But after the fight, Lennox Lewis basically said, everybody saw what happened. I'm the real heavyweight champion. Everybody except Evander Holyfield crowned Lennox Lewis the real heavyweight champion that night, even though he didn't win all the belts, simply because it was for the linear heavyweight championship. And Lennox Lewis, even though the official results will say otherwise, was a default winner because he was robbed in one of the most heinous acts, probably the most heinous one in heavyweight championship boxing history. This, of course, set off all kinds of stuff. One of the good things that happened was all 3 of the governing bodies came out and said no other heavyweight fight will be accepted as a championship fight until Lewis and Holyfield settle their differences in a rematch, basically saying a rematch is a must. That took place 8.5 months later at the Thomas and Mack Center. And the Nevada State Athletic Commission, who saw what happened in New York 26 years ago this week, took advantage of their own abilities and the ability to enforce their own power and put judges of their own, overruling what the governing bodies put, basically putting 3 credible judges. Anybody knows Nevada has a boatload of credible judges over there, especially in championship fights. The Nevada State Athletic Commission took matters in their own hands, took control of it early, and the second fight was better than the first fight, basically by default, because Lennox Lewis wasn't going to look any better, and Evander Holyfield wasn't going to look any worse. But Lewis wins 5 of the last 6 rounds of the rematch to get the rightful decision and to close out the 20th century as the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, getting his long-sought redemption and retribution for the longest time when the American boxing public refused to accept him when he came from Britain to the States. But it was 26 years ago today. The worst decision in heavyweight championship boxing history took place at Madison Square Garden. I was there, and I will tell you this, the scene was absolutely wild. I mean, the English contingent that flew in to see Lennox Lewis was booing all over the place. The results, and they were doing their English chants throughout the fight, chanting for Lennox Lewis. But it was, on that particular night, a disgrace happened. And basically, prompted a rematch, almost forced a rematch when you think about it, because the governing body said no other heavyweight title fight will be declared a championship fight until Holyfield and Lewis settled their differences, which what took place 8.5 months later at the Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas. And that was all she wrote. The conclusion of the 20th century, at a time when the heavyweight division was the glamour division in boxing, and the heavyweight division meant something to fight for the championship, Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis closed it out. The two top heavyweights standing after all of this. They closed out the 90s. They closed out the 20th century with their 2-fight series. Lewis went 1-0-1 officially, which he should have been 2-0, and concludes the 90s as the top heavyweight of the decade. And closes out the 20th century, probably the last time we saw the undisputed heavyweight championship. That meant something, because after he won it, Don King politics again got into the way, was forced to vacate the belts, although Lewis basically said, I didn't care for him anymore, because his mission at that point was getting a cash-out fight with Mike Tyson, which he got in 2002, and just obliterated him in 8 rounds. But the greatest heavyweight post-Muhammad Ali is Lennox Lewis. Some would say Larry Holmes. I understand it. But how Lennox Lewis closed out the 90s when he beat Evander Holyfield twice, really, and wiped out Mike Tyson, and beat other top heavyweights like Michael Gray and David Tua. His career speaks volumes. His place in history is secured. Probably a top 5 or top 6 heavyweight of all time. We consider the fact he was a 3-time champion, and even the 2 losses he had and the draw he had, he avenged big time. And basically, it took a while for the boxing intelligentsia, especially in America, to accept him as a legit heavyweight champion. He earned it. For Evander Holyfield, maybe the second fight should have been his swan song, because he never fought anywhere close to as good as that ever again. Because at the championship level, he never even got close. He fought in the mid-2000s, fought a couple belt holders against Sergey Bragimov and Nikolai Valuev. Didn't look all that great against either, although no one's going to mistake Bragimov and Valuev for the second coming of Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis. But his place is secure. Maybe you could argue his legacy in the 90s was before the 2 Lewis fights, simply because he fought everyone that was out there, anyone that's considered a top heavyweight. He wanted all the smoke, and he got it. Definitely a top 10 heavyweight of all time. His place in history is secure, especially after he wiped out Mike Tyson and had the epic trilogy with Riddick Bowe. And the 2-fight series with Lennox Lewis, even though you could say he really lost both, the fact he wanted Lennox Lewis at a time when Lennox Lewis was starting to get going spoke volumes as to how great Evander Holyfield was. And it was fitting that it was Holyfield and Lewis, the top 2 heavyweights of the 90s, closed out the decade and closed out the 20th century with a 2-fight series for the undisputed heavyweight championship against each other. And it concluded November 13th, 1999, when it was Lennox Lewis who had his hand raised. Their place in history secure regardless. And we talk about all-time great controversial decisions, because we know in combat sports, not just boxing, but also MMA and among many others, when it goes to the judges, who knows what the judges are watching? This fight I went to 26 years ago, this was the worst heavyweight championship fight decision ever. Supplanted what happened between Joe Louis and Jersey Joe Walcott back in the 40s, where Joe Walcott floors Louis twice, wins 10 rounds, and somehow the decision was given to Louis. That was so bad, Joe Louis conceded defeat, basically saying Jersey Joe Walcott was a winner. I wasn't myself. That prompted a rematch where Joe Louis knocked out Jersey Joe Walcott in round 10. It's basically the last great victory of his career. Some of the other ones, of course, I said before, the first fight between Pernell Whitaker and Jose Luis Ramirez, which to me is the worst because Jose Luis Ramirez didn't win a round. The first fight between Marvin Hagler and Vito Antuofermo. I mean, basically, it's almost the same thing that happened to Hagler. And this night was what happened to Lennox Lewis the first time against Evander Holyfield. Same thing. Hagler wins 10 to 11 of the 15 rounds against Antuofermo. Because the boxing intelligentsia never liked Marvin Hagler, they robbed him of that fight. A bigger robbery than Hagler-Leonard, by the way. Because some people call Hagler-Leonard a robbery. Hagler Antuofermo won was 10 to 15 times the robbery Hagler-Leonard was. I encourage you guys to watch that fight and you make a decision for yourself. Who could Forget what took place in San Antonio in 93. Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez. Whitaker wins that fight. Actually, not the robbery that the Ramirez fight was, but Whitaker should have been crowned the winner on that night. Of course, who could forget the amateur round with summer of 1988? Roy Jones Jr. versus Park Si-hung for the gold medal. The gold medal round, Roy Jones just did anything and everything he wanted to, but because the fight was in the Korean backyard and a lot of the international intelligentsia, especially with international boxing, didn't take kindly to Roy Jones' antics and his showboatism, they made sure he was robbed against Park Si-hung. And everybody knows the story with that one. Even Marv Albert, who called that particular fight, known for the NBA, still to this day says it's a decision he can't figure out. So does everybody in the boxing intelligentsia. How do you rob a guy who not only won all 3 rounds going away, had a knockdown in there as warning Park Si-hung for many things, and Hun just didn't even do anything in that particular amateur fight, and they took it away from Roy Jones. Maybe see another one, that amateur round was Antonio Tarver versus Vasily Jirov. Of course, it's a different criteria there. How they scored the fights is based on connected punches. They have this little device where it's like 3 to 5 people have to determine what's a connected punch, because in the amateur round, it's the white part of the glove. But Antonio Tarver didn't get the full credit he thought, and people thought he was robbed against Vasily Jirov as a result. Some other ones, maybe the pro ranks I could divulge into. The most chaotic one that took place in 76 between Antonio Escalera and Tyrone Everett. The wild scene after that one was something else. James Toney fight against Dave Tiberi. Toney gets outworked, and somehow he gets rewarded the decision. Turns out 2 of the 3 judges weren't supposed to judge that fight because they were licensed in the state of New Jersey where the fight took place. Tiberi won that fight, but the robbery was so bad, the politics were so bad, it forced Dave Tiberi out of the sport, where he never fought again. Maybe some of the more recent ones, Paul Williams versus Erislandy Lara. Paul Williams basically coming off the broken up fight against Sergio Martinez, where he was just pasted headfirst on the canvas. It was basically just given a boxing lesson by Lara. Somehow, Lara is robbed of the decision and is given to Williams. And it prompted the 3 judges to be suspended indefinitely and to go through all kinds of judging mechanics, which nobody knows what happened after that. Probably never judged a fight ever again. Of course, Oscar De La Hoya versus Felix Sturm. Sturm wins the last 8 rounds, but because of Oscar De La Hoya's namesake, and because he had a set September 18th fight in 2004 against Bernard Hopkins, the boxing intelligentsia made sure he got that fight, and he was given the decision, where Felix Sturm just basically owned it in the post-fight interview. Of course, I see my English followers overseas. You guys know this one over there. The first fight between Josh Taylor and Jack Catterall. We know the story with that one. Catterall won the first fight. Taylor was given the decision. Excuse me, plain and simple. Everybody knows what happened. We in the States saw it like you guys did over there. Of course, European business sometimes, especially in England and Germany, with their officiating, can get real fishy. Promise, it's too fishy to where anyone who watches fights in Europe sees it on television. That's how bad those are. But then again, I could go on and on, but we know what is boxing without controversy. And of course, the most super recent one was what happened in Brooklyn between Tank Davis and Lamont Roach. The Tank Davis taking a knee. Steve Willis started the count and then pulled back. And basically, the fight was declared a draw. And we know the story at the end of that one. They went to the New York State Athletic Commission and tried to have it overturned. Despite public pushback, the New York State Athletic Commission said, no way. I've always said, let that result stick, because that's going to be what Tank Davis will be remembered for the rest of his career. But what is boxing without its own version of controversies and so-called black eyes? It seems like there's always something. You never get a clean fight without controversy anymore in boxing, because it's always been this way. Actually, it's always been this way for the longest time. I could trace down all of the bad decisions, all the robberies that took place, not just, in terms of the bad decisions, bad stoppages, questionable point deductions, just to name a few, because we have a lot of it. What is boxing without the controversy. I think maybe the beauty and its ugliness of the sport is the controversial aspect of it. I mean, it's beautiful because it gives you something to talk about, but it's also ugly because it gives you something to talk about both ways. You can figure it out yourselves. Because, I've been around the sport for as long as I have, since the 80s, and it's always something. It's something that's always in the way. The sport, the intelligentsia could never find a way to get out of its own way, whatever reason it is. We wish we have like some kind of clean fight to where we don't have to worry about it. But what do we know? What do we know? I mean, every time a fight is announced, everybody's going to start asking what's going to happen next. And of course, now the business aspect of it, with everything out there with social media and the internet, has fight fans drawing their own weird conclusions. I get it. But maybe we just need to sit back and enjoy the fights instead of just complaining about all the garbage that takes place, all the controversy that takes place. Because boxing is not boxing without its controversies. Actually, same could also be said for the MMA field and all the other mixed martial arts that rely on judges. Because you're always going to get one fight where either you get the correct winner, but it's either too close or too wide, or you're going to get one of these fights where you have a unanimous decision, but one judge wants to ruin the party by scoring it incorrectly. That's what we are always stuck with. That's what we've always been stuck with. Maybe we just need to sit back and enjoy the fights and quit complaining about the official result. That's what it's come down to. And I'll just sit back and enjoy it like everybody else does. That's why I quit complaining about bad judging. That's why I quit complaining about bad refereeing. That's why I quit complaining about the political aspect of the sport, because it's been there. It always has been there, and it will always be there. I just sit back and enjoy it, and I sit back and pick this mic up and analyze it. That's all I'm doing. So whatever the criteria is for judging, they can have it. The things you learn when you get older. The things you learn. You just sometimes just got to let things be, move on, and have a peace of mind. That's one thing I've learned at being at age 47. And that will wrap up this edition of Sir Hunt on X. I hope everybody has themselves a wonderful rest of the night and an upcoming 3-day weekend, as I will return Monday. For those of you who missed it or want to check me out on other platforms, I am now live on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, and Spotify. You're more than welcome to check me out on that, as I just now got that venture started. Actually started yesterday. This show will be on there also. And I conclude by saying one thing to everybody always: make self-care your number one priority in life. Take care of yourself first before you take care of anything else. Because if you take care of yourself first, good things always follow, and the best is going to come your way. Don't let anybody treat you as a priority when deep down they're just treating you as an option. Good things will follow. Stay true to yourselves. And that will do it. I hope everyone has themselves a good rest of the day. Until Monday, enjoy the day and enjoy the weekend. Good night. Take care, and God bless.